Shalom Alechem, and may the blessings of the eternally true God, Elohim Chaim Chai Ha'olamim Yah, El Shaddai, El Elyon Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, Elohei Avraham, the true, the one. May he guide us all to the truth, which is ever present and here with us now. So thank you for joining me. And this will be a presentation that I gave to a society that I am a part of. And in our society, we live by certain tenets. And one of the imperatives or tenets that we live by is the quality and archetype of the monk. And I'll be speaking about the monk, the mind of the monk, and what we can learn from the monk. And before we try and integrate the lessons of the monk into the 21st century, which a lot of times there's a knee-jerk reaction to try and understand how we're going to implement all of this spiritual poverty and this lifestyle of a monk into the 21st century. And before we just try and pull it out and into where we are, it's important for us to try and place ourselves in that context and to really familiarize ourselves with the context of the monk and the world that the monk inhabits, which truly is a different world than the one many of us find ourselves in today. So to begin with, we'll do 3 rounds of 4, 7, 8 breathing, and there's a pretty good amount of research on the benefits of this breathwork, and it's rather fast. And so Andrew Weil, I think, is one of the naturopathic physicians Dr. Andrew Weil, who popularized this breathing technique. And if you're driving, please do not do this. Proceed with your own caution in mind. So the goal of starting with this 4-7-8 breathwork is to get us an experience a little bit of the mindfulness of the monk rather than just a lecture about what being a monk is, because that's actually pretty antithetical to the entire reality of the monk. The monk is very, for all of the philosophical sophistication within the traditions of the monk, it is not in the monk-like traditions. They're very philosophically sophisticated, but the realizations and the real purpose of the monk is nonetheless very experiential and very simple. And we hear the likes of this in Rabbi Nachman Breslev, who, as incredibly bright of a light as his soul was, he continually emphasized the need for a simplicity among people, especially in today's day and age with the ever increasing tentacles of the interweb creeping their way into all of our lives and into our palms, and soon to be with Neuralink and other technologies being created into our actual biology. If you're watching this video, I please ask you, do not hook any artificially intelligent technology or any type of breakthrough really tested and really tried and true technologies. Do not hook these things into your physiology, to say the least. So in returning to the monk, it's important for us to start with the 4-7-8 breathwork so that we can get an idea of the real experience of the monk. With that, begin. You'll breathe in for a count of 4, You'll hold for a count of 7. You'll exhale for a count of 8. And it's important that you exhale longer than you hold or inhale, because I've heard that that is one of the key things that activates the parasympathetic rest and digest nervous system. I think it's, the parasympathetic. With that being said, begin. All praise to God. With that, I would just say, regardless of your personal, religious, or spiritual orientation or convictions, hold those dear to you. And I encourage you to continue to develop your spirituality. But in general, it's very important for us who are sincere seekers of the truth at all costs that we develop a nuanced and eclectic perspective, and that we're able to appreciate the beauty, wisdom, knowledge, and truth in other spiritual traditions. And so when we speak about the monk, I once shared a story in this incredible book, Stories of the Spirit, Stories of the Heart, Parables of the Spiritual Path from Around the World, edited by Christina Feldman and Jack Kornfield. I once shared this story, and it's really short, so let me get it for you. But that's a good one. I think it might have been back here. Let's see. It was with the rabbi. The Hasidic. Oh no, that was the Buddha. It's got to be this one. Oh no, that was also the Buddha. Let's see. There is a few of these stories here that will get you in a little bit of a further understanding to what we are going for here. So, let's see. Sorry, I'm so many good stories in here. That's a good one too. Oh, is that the one? No. Let me see here. I think, I must have underlined it a lot. Here we go. 2 disciples of an old rabbi were arguing about the true path to God. One said that the path was built on effort and energy. You must give yourself totally and fully, with all of your effort, to follow the Torah, to pray and to pay attention and to live rightly. The second disciple disagreed. No, he said, it is not effort at all. That is only based on ego. The true path is in true surrender. To follow the way of God, to awaken, is to let go of all things and to live the Torah and the teaching, not my will, but yours, or referring to God. And as they could not agree on who was right, they went to see their spiritual master. He listened as the first disciple praised the path of wholehearted effort. And when asked by his disciple, "Is this the true path?" the master said, "You're right." The second disciple was quite upset and responded eloquently regarding the path of surrender and letting go. When he had finished, he said, "Is this not the true path?" And the master replied, "You are right." A third student who was sitting there said, "Master, they both can't be right. And the master smiled and said, "And you're right also." So often in the spiritual paths that many of us follow, we become over fundamentalist and lose the beauty of nuance and the beauty of a multiplicity of perspectives. And while that can go into relativism, it's important to nonetheless have some sense of a plurality within a unity. And with that, we will continue. The Tao Te Ching states, the ancient and incredible text by Lao Tzu, in section or saying teaching 48, in the pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added. In the practice of the Tao, every day something is subtracted. So again, emphasizing this teaching that we mentioned here at the beginning, which was, this is not necessarily going to be, I wanted to emphasize at the beginning that it's important for us to have a sense that we don't want to over conceptualize things. The monk is rooted in an experiential awareness, in a realization of enlightenment that is not necessarily conceptual. It's actually could be understood as a liberation from concepts in one instance. So within the world of concept and words will not be able to communicate the truth, because the truth dwells, the Tao in this sense, which the monk, both the Dharma and the Tao, these two traditions of Taoism and Buddhism, will be two ways in which we can really appreciate the path of the monk and what their realizations and perspectives have for us, and how we in our society embody this, and then also we as human beings and as men and women can embody this in our day and age. So, I once met a type of monk. He was an old Sikh who was a mystic, and he was a farmer, and he had a long white beard, and he lived outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, where my daughter was born. And we were in great conversation about God and spirituality and talking. And he told me, I meditate for 10 hours per day. And I stopped and I said, how on earth do you have time to do that? And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, well, I'm meditating right now. It is to this continual state of conscious, mindful awareness and stillness and rooted peace that is one of the hallmarks and central aims of the monk. Rafa Condé in the 21st Century Man has stated in the section regarding the first imperative of the monk, quote, the monk is introspective and spiritual. This imperative is a command post and headquarters where the most important information of our life is stored and categorized. The monk is in a state of clarity while he absorbs and categorizes his knowledge bank so he can make clear decisions. So we can see the high rank and really quality that this is given. And I wanted to return to something that I was taught in an unfortunately difficult process that I went through one time. I learned about a very incredibly intense practice called, where is it? It's called I thought it was called, you must have texted it somewhere else. It's called it's a form of ritual suicide. And although that can be rather dark for us to bring up right now, in regards to the monk, what comes to mind is that famous photo in 1960s where the monk lit himself on fire. He sat in, I believe, California amidst the protest of the Vietnam War and all the uprising that was happening in those days. And he had another monk pour gasoline all over his body and then light him on fire. And although people can see a great absurdity in this, this is a crucial part of the monk mind. Even the, ancient Japanese samurai, they would not, ancient, but, the Japanese samurai, they would perform ritual suicide if they knew perhaps they would die, because it was considered, an honorable thing to do. And I'm not here to praise suicide. I'm simply stating that I know the truth of the man on fire a little bit, who lit himself on fire to say something that words could never communicate. In continuing, the state of mind that the monk is seeking to achieve in the quality of experience is achieved through multiple means, of which we're going to dig into here with this book by Ibn Arabi, the Muslim mystic, the likes of which, if you have no idea who this man is, I encourage you, if you are interested in anything regarding biblical mysticism, I would encourage you to familiarize yourself with the light of Ibn Arabi. And we'll be discussing the 4 pillars of spiritual transformation, which he goes through, which are similar as a mystic to what a monk also utilizes in order to develop their selves. So if you're interested in really getting a very good understanding of who and what the monk is, I would encourage you to go and read and reread and reread and reread for years the books, the Dhammapada, attributed to the Buddha. Translation would be a good one by Thomas Cleary, although, anything is really not as good as the original language. And then I would also recommend Tao Te Ching, the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I think Stephen Mitchell might have a really good translate. That's the one I have. So I'd say those are going to give you a taste. And as a Westerner, it can be a little difficult to even appreciate the wisdom of the monks or the Eastern traditions because of just a different way of thinking and different things that they think about. So for instance, the Tao Te Ching says, the Tao is amazing. No, it doesn't say that. It says the Tao is something. I don't remember the exact quote, but the gist of the quote is this: before God was, the Tao eternally is. And my wife said, well, that doesn't make any sense. And I said, well, I read it out loud and then I go, exactly. And she goes, what? That doesn't make any sense. And I go, well, the reason that it doesn't make sense to you is perhaps because you're stuck. And you can only conceptualize, and this is how many people are born in the Western world, especially if they are not initiated into a real tradition with a real ancient language. It can be very difficult to appreciate things like this. But coming from my teachings and my my path in Kabbalah, and now in really immersing myself in Islam and in Sufi mysticism, I said exactly. And the reason you're having a difficulty understanding the truth of what this spiritual teaching is because you can only relate to the divine, the totality of the divine within the three letters G-O-D. You're only let me say it again. The reason a person is having a difficulty appreciating the realization that before God was the
power off.
This thing, am I right? Computers. Sometimes, you know, I don't really think that artificial intelligence is that far ahead, but alas, I do believe that it is. You only have a way of conceptualizing the divine within the three letters G-O-D. So the idea that something exists outside or beyond G-O-D, the letters G-O-D, you can't conceptualize that because the totality of the divine in your worldview is G-O-D. But it's a very unsophisticated approach to metaphysics. So you'll find an expansive amount of vocabulary used in the Kabbalistic tradition of Judaism and in the Sufi tradition of Ibn Arabi, and that it truly can give you a way of understanding, oh, right, okay. There's different ways to refer to different aspects of what we're talking about when we say the divine. And that can give a great amount of understanding that can benefit a person. And so the Buddha is undoubtedly the greatest archetypal example of a monk that we have in history, perhaps Lao Tzu, but I would say the Buddha more archetypally is the monk. He was born into nobility. Many people don't know Siddhartha Gautama. You know, they don't know a little bit about his story. He was actually born as a prince, and he was really, it's interesting looking at the connections between the Buddha and Moshe, alav shalom. It's interesting to look at the different or the similarities, you know, but between the two, they both were raised in a kingdom. They both were given all of the possessions and riches and women and material possessions and freedom and fulfillment of desires that, you know, comes with living in the royalty, complete freedom. They both were given all of the access to the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding of the kingdom. And then they both experienced a crisis of identity upon seeing the suffering of another person. Both Moses when he sees an Egyptian man being beaten, and the Buddha when he sees a person sick, a person old, a person poor, and a person dying. So what's interesting to note about the Buddha and Yeshua and Eliyahu, Muhammad, Moshe, alav shalom, the mystics of the Vedic tradition, John the Baptist, and the Buddha, they all forego a life of riches and material excess and choose a life of poverty in which they seek a deeper truth outside of the zeitgeist. A screech owl has landed on your face, as Martin Shaw would so eloquently write. It's not in the city. The real fulfillment of what you seek, these mystics and these monks realize, and they teach us, it's not there. And by there, I mean civilization. The truth that you seek is an experience. And it's outside of the zeitgeist. It's outside of the walls of this world. They all go to the forests, the deserts, or the mountains alone. They all fast. They all practice night vigils. They all practice times of seclusion, prayer, solitude, fasting, vigil, night vigils alone for extended periods of time. All of them. You could say that this is like a path that was revealed by the prophets. It's crucial for us to think about this. The Vedic tradition, as vast and beautiful as it is, the, Christian mystics, as vast and beautiful as they were and are. I have a little bit of upset feelings, and not upset feelings. Let's see. I have a persuasion that Christianity, how do I say this? I was born and raised an evangelical Christian. My parents were worship leaders our whole life. I was a street evangelist from the age of 13 for many years. I'm very familiar with the Protestant Reformation and the Church Fathers and the Council of Nicaea and how some things progressed and how exactly they took the shape that they have. And I feel like there's a lot of manipulation and there's been a lot of theological gymnastics, as my dad would say, to try and make things make sense when they just realistically don't. And so Christianity, for me, I tend to stay away from, just because I've spoken to many pastors and I've intimately and thoroughly become very familiar with the Hebrew Bible. I mean, the New Testament. I was born and raised with Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts and letters, Romans. I mean, I was raised on the memorization of the New Testament. I'm very familiar with the writings of Paul or pseudo Paul. Some of the writings we don't even know who wrote. Some of the writings, and so on and so forth. I could talk for a long time about my opinions about Christianity. But in general, it's important for us to realize, outside of the theology that can become so divisive, which there is theological truth, and it's important to parse things out and say, listen, that's false. That's a lie. And that doesn't have real relevance according to the biblical tradition. So again, I side with the Muslims and the Jews when it comes to theology, for sure. Having said that, it's important to realize the Islamic tradition, the Christian tradition, the Vedic tradition, the Buddhist tradition, the Jewish tradition, all of the great paths, the founders of these paths, they practice the 4 pillars of spiritual transformation, which are indeed, as we just mentioned, they are silence. Number 2, seclusion. Number 3, fasting. And number 3, vigilance, or the incredibly bright, shining power of the will that will begin to shine forth, and this devotion to this path. Devotion is a good way to think about vigilance. Unanimously, John the Baptist did not come, allegedly, he said some things in the book of John, but We for sure know that he was a mystic in the wilderness, fasting all the time and practicing cold river immersion in the Jordan River. I have been to the land of Israel 3 times, and for weeks each visit, and I have taken a mikvah in the Yarden, and it does come from snow melt from Mount Hermon, and so it's cold. It's very cold, and he was doing this year round for sure, and so he's practicing. We have cold river immersion, we have fasting, we have times of seclusion and silence in the wilderness. Yeshua, times of seclusion in the wilderness, fasting, no doubt, most likely taking ritual immersions, much like the path of John the Baptist and the path of all of the prophets before. Fasting, prayer, vigilance, devotion to the spiritual path. You see this in the likes of the Buddha. You see this in the likes of the Vedic tradition. You see this in the likes of Moses, who goes out to the wilderness alone for years and lives with Jethro, who is a shaman in today's language, and he was a high priest in Pharaoh's courts. There's a machlochet about Yitro, but I believe that there's a great secret in Yitro, and the Muslims agree. The Muslims agree that Yitro was in fact most likely a prophet, and that that Moses actually was given the staff of God at Jethro's home. So again, Elijah goes into the wilderness alone, fasting, time alone, seclusion, devotion. These 4 pillars of spiritual transformation. So this is outside of theology, and this is a path for us to develop the monk imperative, or the mystic monk imperative inside of ourselves, and to truly come face to face with the truths that we seek. Having said that, in today's day and age, I want to return to this reality of they all lived a life of poverty. We can argue about Moses, I guess. I mean, he was perhaps extremely rich, given the fact that they did plunder the land of Egypt of all of their gold and silver. But I think that there's a machloket there as well. At any rate, the majority of all of the spiritual teachers here practice a type of spiritual poverty. And we see this echoed in the teachings of Yeshua as they are recorded in, I don't know what book this is, but it says, "Then someone came to him and said, 'Teacher, what good deed must I do to have eternal life?' And he said, 'Why do you ask me about what is good? There is only one who is good. If you wish to enter into life, keep the commandments.'" And there's a little bit of difference. I think this is probably Matthew. It's a little different from Luke, or there's some differences between Mark, Luke, and Matthew and John and these narratives. At any rate, he said to him, "Which ones?" Yeshua said, it's recorded to have said, "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, honor your father and mother, and also you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself." The young man said to him, "I've kept all these. What do I still lack?" Yeshua is reported to have said, "If you wish to be perfect, go sell all your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me." When the young man heard this word, he went away grieving, for he had many possessions. Then Yeshua is recorded to have said to his disciples, "Truly, I tell you, it will be hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God." When the disciples heard this, they were greatly astounded and said, "Then who can be saved? How can anyone be saved if this is true?" They said, "The love of wealth will withhold one from the paradise?" how can anyone have any hope of being saved? And Yeshua looked at them and is recorded to have said, for mortals it is impossible, but for God all things are possible. So all of these people developed a sort of spiritual poverty, and they did this utilizing the 4 pillars of spiritual transformation, which we just went through: silence, seclusion, fasting, and devotion, vigilance, prayer, the power of your will actualized in action. So I would also recommend that you experiment with drinking potent herbal tea. You know, people say, well, tea, how potent can it be? And it's like, well, ayahuasca is a tea. So tea, it's like a gradation. You know, it can get pretty strong. So drink potent herbal teas, experiment with quality supplementation, really develop a practice with breath work and cold plunges. I would also include saunas, which I have found to be of indescribable importance in my personal soul's development. And utilizing these realities, you will for sure come to an experience of the imperative and the quality of the monk as a reality, and you will be for sure embodying the path of the true mystic and the monk within yourself. So with that, I will say Shalom Alaykum, have a wonderful day, and I'll end with this quote from the book of Proverbs, chapter 17, verse 24. Wisdom dwells before the face of a man with understanding, but the fool's eyes are to the ends of the earth. Shalom.